It's that magical time, class time. Where are my digital friends? Good morning, digital people. Not too many of you in here today. Where is everybody? Oh, it's Friday. You know what it is. They're probably watching Thursday night football. And they are not ready for class at this hour. And if you're a Redskins fan, I think that was a long game.
You tell them. You tell them who won.
You know what? I don't know. I don't know.
TV.
I don't know who won. I don't know who won. I didn't record the game, but every time I changed the channel, Dallas was doing something good and Washington was doing something not so good. So I was like, oof, really? There was a lot of fumbling, a lot of bad tackles, a lot of punt returns yeah, it was ugly. It was really ugly. And I was like, oh yeah. Well, honestly, I don't like to see any team lose for that reason. You know what I mean? Like, if you get beaten because they are a better team, okay. But it's like, ricochet interceptions, fumble the kickoff, give them the ball at the 10, Come on, don't do that, So I don't like to see any team get. Yeah. They're like, let's just put the ball in the end zone. Let's see you guys get out of there. So, yeah. No, I don't like to see any team get hammered because that's upsetting. No, it's okay to. No, I'm not. No, that's okay. I'm not. You're allowed to be a fan of whatever team you wish. But no, I was born in Miami.
Okay.
And we used to live actually quite close to where the Dolphins used to play. And so I grew up a Dolphins fan.
Okay.
So
Still?
They have good seasons, they have bad seasons.
Yeah.
More of the latter.
Yeah.
But you back your team, it doesn't matter. And Miami and New England don't get along, so. Yeah. Mhm.
20 years. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. No, they had their time. Yeah. Yeah. But but that's why. Nobody likes. I don't like to see any team gets mine, or I don't like to see my team slaughter another team either, because that's no fun. It's okay to lose, but I don't like losing. But if you have to. You have to defend your honor and the honor of your team, and I feel like that's why you got to be out there and do your best. So, but anyway, and there's nothing wrong with liking your team. No, with a game like that going on. Actually, I think more than anything, I just wanted to see what Dak Prescott was going to do, because they've been saying he's sort of sliding this year. He had like such a great year last year, and I was like, okay, well, let me see. I haven't seen.
Yeah. Well, he's stuck in. Did you see his hand swole up?
Yeah. Well, the part that you don't know is what's going on in terms of their physical condition, because they don't really go into how banged up they are. And I know that is a huge component to the quality of your performance. And that's not fair, because they get picked on by everybody. But that's being in the limelight and making billions of dollars. And
Yeah, I guess that's the trade.
well, not billions, I guess millions, but for me it's the same.
Right.
But anyway. All right. All righty. You guys ready for lecture 4? Hell yeah. Oh my goodness. We'll try that again. Are we ready for lecture 4? There we go. That's better. Even mock enthusiasm is a good idea. So you can psych yourself into being excited, and I recommend it highly. I love your Christmas hat, by the way. That is super cool. No, it's terrific. Honestly, last night I went to bed very late, then woke up in the middle of the night, and then went to bed again even later. But I wanted to wear my Christmas hat because it's typically December 1st. Forgot this morning in the harried flurry that was my departure this morning. The hat didn't happen. Actually, I'm dressed and I have all the equipment I need, and I'm pretty excited about that. I didn't have breakfast though. Go ahead. You know what? I don't, but I want one. I used to have a red one that I would wear more in the Christmas season, but I wore that shirt to death. I wore it so much it literally just fell apart on me, which is terrible. But yeah, because I'm definitely a Hawaiian shirt kind of guy, so I'm excited to see what there is. But thank you for asking. That'd be cool. That would be awesome if they made a Hawaiian shirt that had like Santa Claus surfing. You know, that would be the nuggets. That would be a great one. All right, so but then I'd wear it every day in December. You guys would be like, "Are you washing that?" Or so what I'm going to have to do is get a couple in different colors so I don't make anybody upset. All right, let's do lecture 4. If you guys remember last class, we were talking all about quads and n-gons and the importance of good quality geometry and mathematically sound geometry, because good things happen to everybody when we model the way we're supposed to be doing it. So today we're going to talk about the cleanup tool, which is this amazing tool for finding problem geometry so you can fix it. The key being finding the geometry so you can fix it. Does that make sense? We want to do the fixing. We don't want Maya trying to fix anything, because Maya is Maya an artist? No. Does Maya know anything about the stuff I'm working on and how it's going to be used in my production pipeline? No, not really, right? So do I want Maya doing any work for me? Hell no is the answer to that. Definitely not. So what we're going to talk about is how we can use Maya to look for these problem pieces of geometry, and then we fix it. And the way I kind of like to set it up is we're going to pretend like we're polygon doctors, and our geometry is sick, and we need to take care of it. So what's going to happen is I'm going to give you a list of ailments. Oh no, these are the things that are wrong with my polygon geometry, and we're going to talk about how to fix each one. Kind of like when you have a cold, it's water, rest, you know, eat good quality food. So what do we do to cure these various ailments? So what you guys will need to do when we get to that part is jot down the different ailments that I give for you, and then how do you fix that? And I will demonstrate it for you so you'll see it in action. But do make sure you have those instructions on how to fix the problem areas, because then you know, you probably guessed it, we're going to ask you to do that. So you will be fixing problem geometry as your skill check, and then your weekly turn-ins from that point on, we'll be looking for that. Did you run your own geometry through the tool and make sure that it works? Does that make sense? Okay. So, lecture 4, we'll see how we do. I think I'm onto something here, and I don't know. I'm not going to use my use slideshow button, and we'll see if my resolution stays reasonable. All right, so first things first, levels of detail. Something I want to talk about is when we're modeling, we model in what we call levels of detail. And levels of detail is the idea that when it's similar to the idea that when you're drawing, the first phase of drawing is we kind of get the simple shape and form for our objects. It's not overly detailed. And then once we get in that simple shape and form, we create simple primitives to represent the volumes of the object we're trying to build. Then we revisit the entire drawing and we do what we call a second pass, and we add details, an added level of detail. And then we hit that drawing again in its entirety, top to bottom, and we add a third level of detail, and that's where we get into the really fine details. So this is the way we draw. So big surprise, this is also the way we model. So we're going to talk about how that works, and an illustration is a terrific way to show that. So in terms of the modeling, when we are starting out with the simple shape and form of objects, we are talking about the primary forms. This is very similar to the idea of blocking out. We're just representing the simple volumes, and in the instance of a character, lines of action. for the poses and so forth. Does that make sense? All of the simple volumes, primitive shapes, we're just trying to occupy a little bit of shape and a little bit of form, but very crude, and we do that entire thing. Primary detail. Then we get to the next level, where we're kind of connecting some of these components together. We're starting to add detail of refinement, and again, we revisit the entire drawing, adding an added level of complexity beyond our primary forms. Does that make sense? We call that secondary forms. We're adding detail, connecting things to each other, adding another level of detail to the entirety of the illustration, in this instance, or the entirety of the model. Okay? Then we arrive at the tertiary forms. Tertiary forms are the very, very fine details that we add at the very end of our illustration. The things that make this object or character unique amongst a world or universe of thousands of these. These are the very fine details. Things like screw holes for the screws to go into, strapping on something. There's all kinds of very fine detail that really sell the object for what it is. Have you ever noticed that the more real an object looks, it's because of the high level of detail behind it? Very fine detail. When you look at a model, you know, whether we're talking about a 3D model or what have you, that doesn't have enough detail on it, it tends to look kind of like a toy because it just doesn't sell as real. And that tertiary level of detail is what really sells an object as real. And that's what we want to make sure we hit, is that tertiary level of detail for the stuff that we build. Because that's, honestly, when it comes to modeling, it's in the details. The more details you can build in there, the better that thing looks, no matter how simple it is. So again, that tertiary form, we're getting into the very fine things, little wrinkles and creases, the little bit that really sells it as what it's supposed to be. Any questions on the ideas of level of detail? How we revisit an illustration in a series of passes? Yeah? Too much detail. I have never heard of that, of which you speak. No, there's no such thing as too much detail. What I like to tell you guys is if you see a detail, make it. So when you're looking at the object you're trying to build, if you can see a detail, try. I mean, you might not successfully pull it off. I want you to try, though, because basically our job as modelers is we are 3D copy machines. Somebody feeds a picture into my head, and I create a 3D version of it. And it's got to be as close to perfect as we can get it. Does that make sense? And I don't like to use the word perfect, but that really is our job. There's no interpretation. My example earlier that I was giving, when you're trying to do a still life, you should be looking at the thing you're drawing just as much, if not more, than the paper you're drawing on. Does that make sense? As soon as you're focusing more on the paper and you're ignoring what you're trying to draw, you're interpreting. We don't interpret. We recreate exactly what we see. Does that make sense? That's what we're trying to do. Go ahead, Brian.
Taylor Brown asks, does too much detail equal too many polygons?
Actually, there is a direct correlation between those. The more detail you build into your model, that is going to correlate to more polygons, because the more detail you have, the finer the detail you have, that's going to equate to more faces on your polygon object. And for this class, I want you to try to get that in there. But we always go from levels of light detail to levels of heavy detail, and that's what I'm talking about with this primary, secondary, and tertiary forms, because what I don't want you to do is start building a model and you've just got a cube, and now you're trying to model the little indentation where a screw goes into the casing of a camera. That's way too soon to try that detail. That's a tertiary detail, and I want you to do that at the end. It's inefficient to approach it any sooner than that. And that's why we divide it up into the various levels. The primary forms, I should just see the basic shape and form of the object you're trying to build. Secondary forms, now we're trying to connect things to each other. Let's try to get the pieces in there that make these eat and fit well. Tertiary forms, that's when we're getting into the very fine stuff like the screws and the indentations. And yes, that's going to up our poly count, but because we went at it in stages, our geometry is more efficient, clean and as light as we can get it, and still hit those details, and easy to manipulate. Because what happens is if you try to jump levels of detail too soon, Usually the proportion is off in terms of the detail, because without all the details around it in place, it's hard to figure out where any specific detail is. And it's actually harder to change the shape of the object the more components that are on it. And that's why we model from light to heavy. It's just like when we draw, we go from light to heavy. If you start with too fine a detail too soon, it's much harder to fix the object. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to draw a picture of a half Brian, half dragon, right? So if I decide, okay, half Brian, half dragon, cool. So I'm imagining this dragon, and it's got, but it's got Brian's arms because it needs to work the keyboard on his laptop. So that's important. So now I need to draw some details about Brian. So then I go, okay, so here I'm going to draw Brian's thumb. There we go. There's Brian's thumb. I'm going to put the little creases there in the thumb. All right. And then, oh, and there was that time he wrecked his ATV, so he's got a little bit of a scar right there on his thumb. I want to put that in there. It's a big scar. And then here's his nail for the fingernail, and there's a little bit of a cuticle. He's pretty well manicured, so I'm going to leave that like it is. And the nail has like these striations on it. If you look closely enough, it's almost fibrous in its surface there. And now here's Brian's thumb. Well, I made that cut too deep. Okay, so now I got the thumb. I'm really excited. Where do I draw Brian's head? Do you see what happens? When you start with a very fine detail and you put sick amounts of detail in it, and then you're like, okay, now where the heck does everything else go? It doesn't work. Modeling is the same. So if I want to do a half Brian, half dragon, what I've got to do is figure out the basic forms of this I'm looking for out of my dragon well in advance. You know, let's give it a big burly torso because Brian likes to work out, right? Let's do some very simple forms and fill in. Does that make sense in terms of I'm going to start really raw, really basic? Yeah, I didn't give you big enough biceps. There you go. All right. Oh, and you know what? I'll put your little winter hat on because that one's one of my favorites. All right. So again, you start with very simple, the broad strokes, and then you work your way towards finer detail because you can see how everything is off when you start too dense, too fine, too soon. Does that make sense? Get a hell yeah? Okay. So thank you for asking that because that's a great question, and I'm sure that helped solidify that for some people who were like, yeah, I kind of get it. Now maybe they really get it. That's why I love when you guys ask questions. It's the way it should be. Active learning, I call it. It's kind of like, any of you guys play baseball or softball? You guys play? Okay, when you're playing a sport, right? If I'm out in the field doing this, am I going to catch anything that comes my way? Nah, probably not, right? Hip angle is out, legs are locked, my attitude is very bad, arms are by my side. Unless I'm in the dugout, this is bad. If I'm in the field, though, right, wide base, I'm square to the ball, shoulders in an active position. The weight is on the ball of my foot, not the heel. I'm going to make that play. Does that make sense? That ball comes my way, it's mine. Does that make sense? I can do that. From this, I can't. The difference is passive participation in your sport, active participation in your sport. Does that make sense? Learning's the same. If you're just sitting there, that's passive participation. You hear the words, and they're flowing over you like waves. You're not holding on to any of that. You're not making that play. I'm ready to learn. I'm actively engaging. Does that make sense? Works better. And that's why I love the questions, because that means your brains are working. I can give you more and better examples, and everybody wins. Make sense? Okay. Active learning. Thank you, Brian. All right. Vocabulary. You know vocabulary means, well, the periwinkle, vocabulary means that's a self-grade document thing, right? Something we're going to be grading on. Edge looping and topology. These are terms you will hear a lot. Again, the whole idea that we have to make good geometry. It's got to be beautiful. The model and building's got to look like what I'm making. But unfortunately, that's the given. It has to look just like the real thing. They expect that. Good math, though, that's what we have to do. So in terms of edge looping and topology, we want to have nice looking edges, nice edge loops on the geometry, nice, clean, efficient looking geometry. To help you understand that, I got a little picture for you, because it's pretty straightforward when you have good edge looping and topology and when you have not as good edge looping and topology. So if you take a look at this model, very light and efficient, decently laid out, all the details are there. There's a level of professionalism in terms of when you look at that. Does that make sense? You look at this model down here, I'm getting some shading errors. You can see the edge looping is really messy. There's no doubt that that's not ideal edge looping and topology. Does that make sense? So when we're looking at your models, do I see this? Or do I see more like that? So when you see that on the self-grade document, that's what we're going for. I want to see that. Because I don't know, how many of you guys have ever taken a look at a demo reel for a modeler? Can you guys look at those demo reels? Your portfolio, how you get work, right? You look at a demo reel for a modeler, one of the things you will almost guarantee you'll see is the edge flow, the edge looping of their models. They will show you the mesh or the cage behind the model because the details are important, but that mesh shows I know what I'm doing and I'm doing it right. Does that make sense? So this becomes a big deal. So this is a part of what we're going for in terms of generating professional work. Questions on edge looping and topology? What we're looking for and what that's all about? Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, not necessarily. And interestingly enough, that's what we're going to talk about today is how we can fix that when you see that kind of thing, because that's actually, this is one of our illnesses that we have to fix in our polygon geometry when we're talking about non-planar faces, which is an aspect of non-manifold geometry. So we're going to delve into how do I fix that. So that's a great question. But, you know, this is obviously a no-no. And you can see, if you look at this and you look at this, I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist. If you were in a company that was in a position to hire somebody, right? You're like, okay, we've got $50,000 to hire one person. That's it. We don't get any more money. We don't get any more chances. We have to hire this person. If you're looking at two demo reels and you see edge looping like this and you see edge looping like that, who are you going to talk to? Right. Does that make sense? No brainer. This guy might be really cool, right? Really funny, great guy, works hard, great pool player, whatever. I've only got one amount of money to hire somebody. And if I make a bad choice, my company could fail. I'm going to make the right choice, always. Does that make sense? They don't hire friends. They hire very talented friends, but they're not looking for buddies. They're looking to survive. And this is a very challenging field. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So what we're going for, let's look as professional as possible with the stuff we build. Great question. All right. Another little vocabulary thing. Again, this is a component of your self-grade document. When you see edge quality on your model, what we are talking about is the transition of surfaces, where they come together, where those edges meet. How do those surfaces meet each other? It's sort of the curve on objects, that nice little smooth transition that becomes very evident as soon as light strikes the surface. And we're going to talk about that in greater detail on these next couple of slides so that you are very comfortable with edge quality as a thought. So edge quality. Here's a car, Cadillac, that was built in the 50s. And if you take a look at this vehicle, you'll see all over it the transitions in the shapes. If you look at how the shapes transition from one to the other, there's sort of a look or a feel or sort of a personality to this car as a result of the edge quality of the surfaces. And no matter where you look on this car, it seems to have that same characteristics, that same personality of edge quality to it. All right. Now, in terms of the era, again, this car was built in the 50s. You know, it's like post-World War II. Everybody's really happy. It's sort of a fun time to be alive. And sort of the feel of the car kind of resonates with that. And what's interesting is if you see other cars that are built in the 50s, a lot of them have the same look and feel, the same design. You can go, oh, that's a car from the 50s. When you see it, you can recognize it as such. So point being, there's a personality to that. The lines of the object, the design, very similar. Does that make sense? And again, you can see how the light plays on these surfaces and the way they transition from one to the other. You can really see how the light behaves when you put light on an object and that edge quality is revealed. Does that make sense? Let's ice that up a little bit more. Here's another Cadillac. Same car company. This one was built in the 70s. All right? Look at the edge quality of this. Look at these hard lines. Look at these really crisp transitions that take place as we change from surface to surface. Totally different look, totally different feel, totally different era. Again, you can look at other cars and say, hey, that car was made in the 70s just by looking at it. Does that make sense? There's a look, a feel, a characteristic, a personality of the object, and it's reflected, no pun intended, by the edge quality or how those surfaces come together. Much like the idea that you can look at a toy, right? I can look at a toy gun that was made for a 3 or 5-year-old, and I can look at a toy gun that's made for like a 14, 15-year-old, and I can tell about what age group that thing was made for. Does that make sense? And what you're looking at, levels of detail, but also edge quality, because depending on who's using it, that's going to affect the edge quality. Very young kids' toys are very rounded, so they can't hurt themselves with it. Does that make sense? A lot less points and corners. Okay, get a hell yeah there. Oh, yeah. Okay, just checking. So edge quality, again, how these surfaces transition and how the light strikes those surfaces. Now, the good news is we actually have this really cool tool called the bevel tool. And it actually, I mean, in terms of edge quality, you could model it using the insert edge loop tool. You could do it with the extrude tool, totally fine. But what's great is we have this tool that will help us out tremendously with the creation, of good edge quality, and it's called the bevel tool. It's super fun. So big surprise. You guys want to play with this thing for a minute? All right. So here we go. Bevel tool. So first I'm going to set my project. File, set project. And choose my activity files. And then file, open scene, and you will see the bevel tool activity. All right. Now, in the bevel tool activity, I've given you a couple of really fun pieces of geometry, and this is going to help you understand how it works. So watch me. I'm going to do some stuff on these two pieces, and then you guys can play and go crazy. The good news is this is actually a pretty easy tool to work with. It works on edges. Just take a quick look at these two surfaces, okay? You guys looking at that? Look at these two surfaces and look at that hard, crisp transition there. Does that make sense? Crazy 90-degree angle. And the reality is, in our universe as we understand it, really nothing comes together at 90-degree angles like that. It's very unrealistic, right? And that's why when you're playing a video game, depending on the type of game system you're playing with, things look very sort of gamey because they have very hard, crisp edges, so they don't look overly realistic. And if you look at the desk right in front of you, you would perceive that to be a 90-degree angle where the surface of the desk meets the side. But if you run your thumb over the edge of the desk, there's a little bit of rounding going on there, just the tiniest bit. But that makes a big difference in that surface. Does that make sense? You guys feel that? Are you touching your desks right now? Don't make that just me. Thank you for playing. All right, so touch that corner, and you'll see there's a little bit of rounding going on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some rounding on this object here. So this is the way the tool works. First, you go to edge mode, because this tool works on edges. And I'm going to select the edges across the top of this cube. And you'll notice I got all 4 of them. All right? And I'm going to go to my, it's under Edit Mesh, Bevel. And when you run the Bevel tool, there's a couple of different fun little things we can play with. And what I really like about this tool is this sort of interactive dialog box, which pops up and allows you to make adjustments to what you did. All right. So the first attribute is fraction. And what I'd like you to think about the Bevel tool, what it's doing, is it's almost like taking sandpaper to your geometry, and you're just kind of sanding the corners off of stuff to make it softer. It's that simple. So fraction is like, how much am I sanding? Am I sanding a lot or am I sanding a little? So if you hover your cursor over the word fraction and hold down the left mouse button and you move it, you can actually adjust how much is being sanded off your object in terms of that corner. So you can set it for whatever you want. Next, segments. Segments is determining how many edges are going to be created between those 2 edges that you just created when you created that sanded area. So again, left mouse button over the word segments, drag left and right, I can add segments or remove segments. And what you will notice about it is the more segments you have, the more smooth the transition. So if you want to make it more rounded or less rounded, you can add more segments. All right, now the next thing we're going to talk about is depth. Now depth is talking about the curvature to this beveling that we're doing. You can actually, at a bevel of 1, it sort of goes outward, sort of bubbly, and you can actually reduce that number and make it less bubbly by going with a smaller number. And if you go into negative values, you can kind of invert it and make sort of a Pizza Hut looking roof if you want to. So you can make adjustments to it. Look, it looks like it's breathing. But anyway, so you can do some rounding there. And what I want to show you is if you look at this object, look at how the light plays on this edge now that I've done that bevel. Do you see the highlight areas there? How much more gentle? I mean, that almost looks like a block that you would build for a child. You know, those alphabet blocks and stuff like that, so they don't hurt themselves. Nice and rounded. Versus this corner, which looks like it could sever a limb. Does that make sense? So you can see how the light plays on that surface, right? So let's look at another object. All right, here's a cylinder. I get this quite a bit where people are like, ooh, it makes it softer and smoother. So I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to grab all these edges and I'm going to bevel them. But the sides of this cylinder are already smooth. It's already curved. You can't bevel something that's already curved like that. Does that make sense? All I did was create more geometry, and bad geometry at that. So we don't, this surface is already smooth. Do you see that? No need to adjust that. But this part up here, oh yeah, look at that. You know, imagine this was the lip of a beer bottle or a soda bottle. That would hurt to drink out of that thing. Yeah, seriously, you could seriously hurt someone. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bevel it. So I'm going to grab one edge, and then I'm going to double click on it. And it grabs everybody all the way around, which is a nice, fast little trick for selection. And then Edit Mesh, Bevel. And again, I'm going to adjust the fraction. And then I'm going to add some segments to it. Now look at that. That looks much better, right? And I can do the same thing with the interior. Because if I'm going to make the outside nice and smooth, why would I not make the inside nice and smooth? So let me adjust that fraction. I don't want it too severe. I'm going to add some segments to it. Now look at that. Totally different edge quality in terms of what's going on there. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So what I want you guys to do is obviously try to do these two things here, but then I would love for you to play with this crazy thing. And what I want you to do is just select various edges and run the tool and take note of how it softens the corners of things and the edges. But do pay particular attention to the edge flow that it creates. Because what you will come to realize is if you're not careful, the bevel tool will create illegal geometry. It will create n-gons. So you got to look very carefully at what you've selected when you run the tool and the result you get. So you are responsible for the edge flow of your model. So you got to make sure you're taking a look at that after the fact to see what the heck's going on. All right? So Brian and I will walk around real quick and see how you guys are doing with that, but I want to see you play with this. Again, this is a super easy tool to use, fast and fun. So let's get on that. We got sound going? There we go, yay! So what do you guys think? This is a pretty easy tool to work with, right? Super, it's a good one. Yes, yeah, the bevel tool is super fun. Again, you do have to be careful with it because it is messy. The edge flow it gives you could be terrible, but it's really great at making your models look smoother. It's that added level of realism when you're modeling because, again, surfaces just don't come together in 90-degree angles. That just doesn't happen. Good, good. Looks like you guys are doing terrific. Awesome. How are we doing? What do you think? You like the bevel tool? Good. Cool. All right. So it looks like you guys are doing pretty well with this. As I said, it's not that crazy a tool to work with, but what I want you to remember is when you're looking at the self-grade document and it says edge quality, Is it there or is it not? That should register in your brain as, did they use the bevel tool? Yes or no? Does that make sense? Edge quality, bevel tool. Because everything should have some smoothness to that curvature where surfaces meet. So that's sort of the last pass. You know, you model it, you make it look great. It's time to get into our tertiary detail level. Let's put that little bit of curvature on my model and make sure that it looks like the real one does. Again, getting those corners and those edges just the way they're actually represented. Because light will show that stuff off. Yes, absolutely. Exactly. It doesn't look right at all. It looks gamey. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's important that you get that edge quality in there, because what happens is, you know, we're looking at very primitive lighting here, and we can already see the difference in that corner, the way those edges come together. But when you put real materials on these objects and you light them, you know, if you don't have good edge quality, it's going to look awful right from go. Yeah, it will look very unrealistic, and the behavior of the light will not be right, you know, right the way we perceive it. And, you know, honestly, light is either your best friend or your worst enemy, you know, because light is what really shows off your objects. And if you have good edge quality, your models look great. Poor edge quality will definitely hurt you. And you don't want to wait till you get to the lighting and rendering phase to realize, whoops, that could look better. So, yeah, edge quality. Absolutely, absolutely. And that's why we teach you how to do all this stuff, because as a modeler, you're not just responsible for, okay, my model's done. What does your model look like when you put light on it? What does how does your model perform when we build a rig for it? You know what I mean? You need to know how to do those things, because the way you do your job will affect other people. So if I know what other people are going to be doing and what they're looking for and at when they look at my stuff, I can do that stuff in advance. So before it even gets to someone else and they have a problem, fix the problems on my own. Does that make sense? And that's why I always tell everybody, no matter what it is you want to do, that's great. Focus on that. But you should know how to do quite a few other positions within the 3D pipeline, because obviously the more you know, the more valuable you are. But the more you know about what happens to your stuff when it gets to someone else, you can do a better job on your end in preparing it for that other person. And then everybody wants to work with you. Oh, I love the models he builds. You know, they always perform really well. Or, you know, she does a great job with the UV mapping. You know, the textures are a joy, you know. So you want to be that person who everyone likes to work with. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so edge quality. We're talking about the bevel tool, so make sure you incorporate that. Let's get into some more fun stuff. All right, another periwinkle vocabulary thing. Yep, I'm doing it again, and you can't stop me. Clean geometry. Clean geometry is when we are talking about good quality geometry, light efficient geometry. We're talking about fully quadded, happy geometry, and we're trying to avoid, again, these geometry or polygon ailments that we're going to talk about. Things like non-manifold geometry, n-gons, interior faces. There's a whole zoo of things that can go wrong with your polygons, and that's what we're going to talk about fixing. So again, when you're looking at the self-grade document, you see clean geometry is one of the things we're looking for. This is what we're looking for. You got to run the cleanup tool on your geometry and fix any issues that it shows you. So the keys are A, being able to recognize what the problem is when Maya shows it to you, and B, knowing how to fix it. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. How do I recognize the problem? What does it look like? How do I fix it? Yes? Don't let Maya fix it. That's right. That's number 3. Do not let Maya fix it for you, because Maya is an amazing tool, but it's not meant to be on autopilot, right? There's a reason there's a pilot holding the stick when you take off and land. You know, autopilot can handle while you're in flight. That's fine. But we do not let autopilot take off or land. So let's get into the use of that cleanup tool to clean your geometry. And again, there can be all kinds of issues that are created as a result of bad geometry. And some of it affects you directly, tools don't work. Some of it affects everybody else when we're talking about things like information and the texturing processes. So if you have poor quality geometry, you will make other people unhappy. So we're always trying to avoid that. All right, so let's get into our polygon elements. Our first one, unsupported vertices. In terms of unsupported vertices, it is possible that you need a detail that looks like this, where you have an opening in the middle of a piece of geometry. That can happen. However, you will notice that these vertices are not connected to each other. They're just sort of kind of floating in space. Not to mention the fact that this is a big, huge end gun. This is an 8-sided face, which we know that's a no-no. But these vertices are not properly connected to each other and not supported. So you can have that detail, but this is geometrically sound. This is not. Does that make sense? I need these edges. They make this math good. Make sense? Okay, thank you. So unsupported vertices, that's a naughty no-no. Non-planar faces. Non-planar faces is the idea that when you're looking at a single face on your polygon geometry, one of the vertices is not in alignment with the other three. And what it creates is sort of a bend or a fold. You know, this is where we would like to be, and even slightly off is okay. This is kind of a problem. What I'd like you to do is imagine the faces on your geometry like a piece of paper, nice and flat. All the corners are more or less in the same plane, right? A little bit of a bend here or there, not a big deal. If one of your corners is way out of alignment, this is a problem. Does that make sense? I'm causing this one face to bend, and there's no edge to support that bend. Does that make sense? All right? If you have to bend a single face of geometry into some crazy shape to get a detail, you are pushing that one face too hard. You need more faces. You don't have enough for that detail. You need to put more geometry in that area to create that detail. Does that make sense? We want them nice and happy. And it doesn't have to be perfectly flat, but as close to flat as you can is ideal for the behavior of the geometry. So you want it to be, again, nice and fairly even. Lamina faces. I usually get some smiles when I put this one up, because we just learned how to use the extrude tool. How many of you guys have seen this already? Yeah, lamina faces. What's happening is you've got faces directly on top of each other, and Maya is having a really hard time figuring out how to light this object. Now, in terms of the object and lighting it, you may be like, what? Lighting it? What are you talking about? Well, when I'm in Maya, right? Let me go over here to Maya. Boop. And I'm looking at an object. I see highlight and shadow, right? That's how we perceive depth, highlights and shadows. That's what gives us depth information, and we read 3D from that, right? So, is there really light inside of Maya? No, not really. There's a mathematical algorithm or formula that helps Maya calculate light and light-like behavior. Does that make sense? So I can get a perception of light and shadow. But what's happening is, on your polygon objects, we've talked about the components, right? What are the three components of a polygon object in terms of modeling? Vertices, faces, and edges, right? Those are the three primary modeling components of a polygon object. There's another component called the normal. And normals are basically sort of like a little thermometer. Like thermometers measure heat. The normals measure light. So what happens is, if a polygon face is pointed right at the light indicates on the normal the angle and the intensity of the light striking the surface. So Maya can figure out what the relative angle of the face is to the light source and light it appropriately. Does that make sense? If I'm facing the other way, I don't get any light. If I'm facing right at it, I get all the light. If I'm facing off of it, I get some of the light. Does that make sense? That's what normals do. Every face has them. You can't see them. You have to turn them on or off to see them. But they're there. And that's all they do is receive light and tell Maya how to light that face. So the problem that we're having with lamina faces is the issue that the polygon geometry exists with two faces directly on top of each other, and Maya has no idea how to light that. They call that Z-fighting or depth issues, because Maya doesn't know if there's two faces directly on top of each other, which one gets the light and which one gets the shadow. I have no idea. So for first-time modelers using the extrude tool, sometimes you'll get this shading error. Does that make sense? And that's what's going on. Faces on top of each other. So we got to fix that too. That's an issue. Hey, guys, do you have a question in the back? Okay. If you have a question, bring it up. You know, I would love for you guys to make mention of or ask for more information about whatever you want to know more about. Definitely. But I'd like to keep the conversations running this direction, east to west. That's the way we're facing. I want the questions to run east-west rather than north and south. Does that make sense? I like that you guys are helping each other. That's terrific. You should be working in teams. Collaboration is a great way to go in this line of work. But in terms of lecture time, it's really better if we run front to back. There was a question. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. Normal map works off of that same basic principle. The normal map is the use of a map that gives you varied surface information in terms of lighting to make a surface look like it has more detail than it does. Because what it's not physically changing the surface, but what it's doing is it's asking Maya, hey, could you light this a little different? I mean, I know it doesn't look like that, but could you light it like there's a detail on there? And it's all illusion. So it's very cool. And you'll learn more about that actually next class when you guys get into ZBrush and you start using normal maps to fake detail on geometry because you can't support that many faces, because that happens. Good question though. All right. So again, lamina faces is not good. Non-manifold geometry. This is the trifecta of naughtiness. There's three different varieties of non-manifold geometry. The first of which is when we've got three faces that share a single edge. You see this face, and this face all share that edge. Right? You can't have that. That's mathematically unsound. And if we needed something like this to come off of there, this should have some thickness to it. And if it had some thickness to it, there'd be an additional edge that connects all the way around down there. And then that would be fine. But just like that, three faces sharing one edge, that's a naughty no-no. Non-manifold. Another variety of non-manifold, two faces connected to each other by a single vertice. One vertice holds those two faces together. It'd be like attaching my arm to my body by one atom. Does that make sense? That can't happen. So in terms of that behavior, that can't happen either. Another variety of non-manifold, two faces with opposite normals. Remember we were talking about the normals as little indicators that tell us about light? If you look at the surface of this object, and that's the normal, by the way, this surface is saying that this is the outside of the object, because that's the part that receives the light, and Maya would give it shading and lighting information. This surface says the bottom is the outside, and this is the inside, because they don't have normals on the inside. Normals are only on one side of a face. So in terms of its behavior here, these are opposite. That doesn't happen. Does that make sense? There has to be the outside of the object, and there has to be the inside of the object, and they can't be right next to each other. Because if we're talking about if we're looking at the jar, right? The jar has an inside and it has an outside. But there's a lip that connects the two. So the normals on the inside point inward, and the normals on the outside point outward. Does that make sense? There's a thickness there. We have to have that. So we don't have the inside and the outside right next to each other like that. Our next little issue, faces with zero surface area. Again, first time extruders will run into this one. What happens is you can set up your computer if you want to have these little blue dots. And they should be in the middle of the face. That's an indication of that's a face. And that's what you click on when you want to select that face. And it's a preference. I can show you guys how to do that. But if you look at this, you're like, wait a minute. Here's an edge, and it's got a dot on it. The problem is there's a face in there. It's so small, it's been squished to the thickness of an edge. But there is a face in there. And if you grab one of the vertices on the corner and move it up, you can see the face that's hidden inside there. And where this causes problems is, obviously, there's going to be math issues. Tools aren't going to work right. How do I cut a face that has no surface area to it? Right? How do I light a face that has no surface area to it? Right? We talked about each face on your polygon geometry. We want it to be nice and flat. Another thing you want is you want the faces to be out, not zero surface. Think of them like leaves, right? Every little leaf needs to get some sunshine, or you can have a sick plant. So the issue here is these faces are not getting to the light. It's kind of a problem. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, these faces with zero surface area, also an issue. Now comes the good news. Those are a lot of ailments. Those are a lot of problems I have to be careful of. If you're looking at a cube, it's pretty easy to spot some of those problems, right? I gave you very simple examples. But what happens if I'm looking at a 1,000,000 polygon Optimus Prime? How the heck do I find problem geometry there? The good news is there's the cleanup tool, which can find those issues for you so you can fix them. But as long as you know what they look like and how to fix them, you're good. Does that make sense? Okay. So cleanup tool is your buddy. And again, once you're all done modeling, that's when you start looking at that. Now, in terms of the cleanup, again, you want to make sure that you're setting Maya to look for the problem. You fix it. And you don't want Maya fixing anything. Now, in terms of where the cleanup tool is, it's under Mesh. If you scroll down like 3/4 of the way under Optimize, you will see the cleanup tool. And again, of optimal or ideal use, you don't want Maya to fix anything. You want Maya to show you the problems. And the reason I bring that up so many times is because the tool, by default, is set for let Maya fix it. Okay? That's the default setting. Let Maya fix it. That's not what we want. Does that make sense? So we have to switch that. Because I got to be honest with you, if you select your geometry and you tell Maya to fix it, it's going to triangulate your entire model. Every face will be turned into a triangle. That's bad if you're fuzzy on the good bad. Does that make sense? We don't want that to happen. So what we want is for Maya to show me, hey, this is a problem. Can you please fix that? Yep, done deal. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, we don't want Maya fixing anything. And you know, we've got a fun little activity for it, identifying bad geometry. See, it's cursing. Bad geometry. Oh, come on. That's why, honestly, that's why I don't tell jokes. I am a situational humorist. I find the humor in what's happening around me. If I try to tell a joke, it falls flat. It just doesn't work. But anyway, bad geometry curses. And obviously, this is bad geometry. A number of issues going on there. But we're going to talk about the cleanup tool. Now, the important thing is I'm going to show you the polygon elements one at a time, the ones we talked about, and then I'm going to show you how to fix them one at a time, like we talked about, the ones that were on the slides. So make sure you're paying close attention to what I'm doing and writing down what I'm talking about, because then you're going to have to do it. Does that make sense? So if you don't have the instructions on how to fix the problems we talked about, you're going to be floundering a little bit. So make sure you're paying close attention and asking me questions about what I'm doing to fix these various issues. Does that make sense? Okay, and then you'll get to do it now, and I can watch you a little bit. So let's take a look at the problems and how do I fix them. All right, first things first, we must open our project. I'm going to have to actually reset mine because this is actually a skill check, so I'm going to want to set it to my skill check. And I'm going to open up my cleanup project. Okay. Now, if you look at this really awesome blaster, if you look at this awesome blaster, which you should probably recognize as Han Solo's blaster, it looks great, right? But let's talk about lots of geometry problems, issues that are going to cause all kinds of mayhem in my CG production pipeline, and we have to fix them. So models can look great and have problems, so just be aware. Beauty is not even polygon deep, so we need to fix this. Now, what we've done for you guys to aid in this process is we've created a bunch of different layers in Maya, and each of these layers is representing an issue that we have to fix. So I'm going to use that to demonstrate for you the different issues, and then there's a section where you're going to go in and do it. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn everything off, and by clicking the little V's on the outside, I'm turning everything off. And the reason you do that is because if I leave them all on, it's kind of overwhelming. It's a lot in my face, and it's hard to see what I'm looking at. So by having layers, I have the ability to isolate things to just the stuff I'm looking for. And when it comes to troubleshooting, and this is not just Maya or applications, but life in general, you can't have too many variables or you don't know what you did to fix the problem or what you're doing to fix the problem. It's very important to isolate the problems and eliminate what it's not one at a time, and then that leaves you with what the solution is. Does that make sense? That's not just Maya, that's life. So otherwise you don't know what you're doing or where you're going with it. So if we hide everything and then we turn things on one at a time, we can look for the issues. And I bring that up because when you're using the cleanup tool on your own geometry, you're going to have to do that. Look for things one at a time or you don't know what you're looking at. So let's look at this first one. And you can see it's all about n-gons. So there are some n-gons on this geometry. You may or may not be able to see them. Hint, hint, bam. But in terms of my geometry, it needs to be fixed. Now, let's just say I can't see where this issue is, and I need to find it. Well, here's where that cleanup tool comes in big time. The way you use the cleanup tool is first, you select the geometry in object mode. Has to be selected, has to be object mode. These are important. Next, under Mesh, you will see the cleanup tool. All right. When I open it up, again, it defaults to clean up, which is going to be basically, I know what you want. You want me to make your entire model out of triangles. That's not what I want. Does that make sense? That's why we don't let Maya fix it, because Maya, I'll give you an example. You might ask me, hey, could you paint my house for me? Yeah, I can paint your house for you. Could you do it for like 50 bucks? Yeah, I can paint your house for 50 bucks. I'm going to take a paint bucket and throw it at your house. Technically, I painted your house. I did what you asked for, ish. Does that make sense? When you let Maya do the cleaning up, that's what you're getting. Paint bucket thrown at your house. I did what you wanted, sort of. Does that make sense? So we don't let Maya fix anything, ever. All right, so here's the deal. Cleanup options, I want it to select. So make sure you choose select. Now there's a bunch of things Maya could be looking for. Again, if they're all turned on, I don't know which thing is the problem. So I turn off everything that it's looking for. Now I know on this level, I'm looking for n-gons, which is faces with more than 4 sides, right? So if I tell Maya, show me faces with more than 4 sides, I'm going to turn that on. Show me the faces with more than 4 sides. and I hit apply. Boop. When I look at my geometry, oh, okay, yeah, that face is a problem. All right. Looks pretty good. All right, I'm going to have to fix this guy right here. Here's my problem. Now, Maya has shown me where the issue is. Now I have to fix it. If you guys had to take a wild guess, what do you think I need to do there? What do I need to do? Multi-cut tool, right? That's a great tool for adding in edges where I need them. And again, I can't use the insert edge loop tool because the insert edge loop tool will not cut faces that have more than 4 sides, so I can't fix this with that. It's got to be the multi-cut. Does that make sense? Okay. So multi-cut tool is going to help me fix that. So I can go into Mesh Tools, get out my multi-cut, and then start fixing it. Click and drag until it gets caught on the corner. Click and drag till it gets caught on the corner. Enter. Ooh, it's looking better already. Click and drag. Click and drag. Enter. Click and drag. Click and drag. Enter. Click and drag. Click and drag. Enter. All right, now it's starting to have 4 sides on it. Click and drag. Click and drag. Enter. I'm just connecting these things. And watch this. I can click and drag here and go all the way down here and click and drag, and it's going to put the middle one in there for me. I don't even have to line that up myself. Click and drag all the way around the corner. Enter. So now I have fixed that. So when I select the geometry and I say show me the faces with more than 4 sides, apply, good to go. Does that make sense? No problems there. Clean as a whistle in terms of 4-sided faces. Does that make sense? I've eliminated that problem. All right, let's do another one. I'm going to turn that layer off. Floating vertices. All right? Remember we talked about unsupported vertices? We were looking at that piece of geometry with the opening in the middle and the vertices were not properly connected to the sides. So I'm looking at this piece of geometry and I go, hey, this looks great. Awesome. I see 4-sided faces. That's the shape I want. I'm done. Oh, wait. I got to run the tool on it and see. Again, select the geometry in object mode. Got to be selected, got to be object mode. Go to Mesh, Cleanup. The tool opens up. Select for me faces with more than 4 sides. N-gons, right? That's what I was looking for before. Boop. What? How could those have 4 sides on them? Well, I mean, more than 4. That doesn't make sense. I see 4 sides. That can't be. Maya, you're a liar. Well, Maya is many things. Not a liar, though. So in terms of this application, or in terms of this geometry, what's wrong with it? Well, I'm going to have to figure that out. I'm going to go to vertex mode, because sometimes that'll give you a better look at the faces. So I go to vertex mode, and I see, oh, wait a minute. What are these guys doing on my model? They're on my model. Are they properly connected to each other? No, because there's no edge connecting them to each other, right? These guys should be... Does that make sense? So my geometry looked 4-sided. No, because this vertex makes that 2 edges. That's why that's showing up as an n-gon. That's why if I try to use my insert edge loop tool, not going to work. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's what I have to do. Fix it. So I know I've got unsupported vertices. So you've got 2 options when you've got unsupported vertices. 1, delete the vertices, or 2, connect the vertices. So what you have to do is determine which of them do I need to do. Does that make sense? Which one do I need to do? So here's how we determine. 1, delete the vertices. The good news is vertices that are not properly attached, when you select them, if you hit delete, they go away. Now you might be going, oh no! What if I delete vertices that do have a job to do, and they are connected to each other. Well, here's the thing. If you grab vertices that are connected and vertices that are not, and you hit delete, only the ones that are not properly connected will be deleted. The ones that are properly connected will not be. You can literally select an object and hit delete, and you will never remove a vertice that is properly connected to each other. Does that make sense? That's not a problem. But here's where it might be a problem. Let's say I'm modeling something, and this is a detail that I need. I want it to look like that. Does that make sense? If I delete these vertices because they're not properly connected, did that change the shape? Yeah, so I needed those vertices. I can't just delete them. Does that make sense? So if you need them, guess what the solution is? Connect them to each other. So what you're going to have to do is come in here and use, guess which tool? Multi-cut. Why are you teaching us multi-cut? It's so slow. This is exactly why, because this is what it's great at, fixing this problem. So I go to my mesh tools, I get my multi-cut out, and I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to connect these bad boys to each other. Whoop. Connect. Whoop. 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 I try to make sound effects with Maya because Maya doesn't make any noises. It really should. I wish it did. If somebody made like a sound pack for this, I would so get it. But do you see how I had to reconnect that? Does that make sense? I have to fix that because I need that thing to be up in the air like that. And that's the difference. Hell yeah? Okay, good. All right. Let's go to the next element. Flipped normals. All right. Oops. Got to put my tool down. We talked about that, right? So if I look at this piece of geometry, you're like, what? Why is it all jet black in color? That's crazy. And when I go inside, oh yeah, that's the color I'm used to seeing. The normals are flipped. This thing is basically inside out, like a sock. So we've got to fix that. The good news is it's super easy to fix that. You remember me telling you guys about the normals? Those little thermometers basically for light? Well, you can turn those on or off, and this is the way you do that. Display, polygons, face normals. This is where this is. And when you turn that on, it creates those little green indicators of the inside and the outside of the object. Now, when you look at this, you might think, okay, well, I see them. Aren't they supposed to be on the outside, not the inside? Why do I see them out here, where conceivably this is the inside? That's because they are actually on the outside of the object, but they're so long, they're sticking through to out here. Does that make sense? Almost like needles on a cactus. So these things should be on the outside. They are on the inside. If this thing was facing the right direction, there would be very few, if any, normals inside the object. So here's what I'm going to do to fix it. It's pretty easy. Again, select the geometry in object mode. Got to be selected, got to be object mode. Go to Mesh Display and choose Reverse. And it will literally flip it to where the outside is now the outside and the inside is now the inside, as it should be. And when you select the geometry, there's all the normals on the outside. That's what it should look like. Does that make sense? And if you look on the inside, there's almost no normals in there. The very few that you do see are sticking through from these faces all the way through. Yep. Select the object in object mode, Mesh Display, Reverse.
Thank you.
So again, you can do the same thing over here. And now they're facing the right way. Whee! Again, super easy. Non-planar faces. All right. Now, do you guys remember me talking about the, oh, actually, this is a better one to show the other thing. This one right here is a better one. Okay. Remember me talking about seeing some twists or folds in the faces of your geometry where your geometries, some of the vertices are out of alignment from the rest of them? All right, that's what we're looking at here. And the best way that you can see that is if you look, these edges, again, they're like the girders of a building. They give you the support and the structure. You should see an edge on the edge of everything you build. But if you look at this piece of geometry, you'll see there's no edge right here. I can see the surface of the geometry, and it's basically, if this is the sky, the face is touching the sky, and there's no edge over here. And you can see it over here as well. This face is being bent. Now, in terms of fixing that, it's actually pretty easy. You can just, in this instance, you just grab all the vertices here, and using your rotate tool, take the twist out of it. And then when you look at it, now do you see how the edge of the geometry is defined by an edge? The surface of the face is not touching the sky. Does that make sense? So this is what it should look like. Nice crisp edges all the way around. Face is not bent or twisted. Does that make sense? Get a hell yeah? All right, good. All right, let's look at faces with zero surface area. Remember me talking about those dots that show you the middle of a face, right? If I look at my geometry, there's a dot in the middle of the face. But look at, there's a dot on an edge, right? Face with zero surface area. And again, if I go to the vertices, I can grab a single vertice and move it. And you can see, oh, not that one. Let me try this one. You can see, uh-oh, that doesn't look right. What's my model doing? Oh, it's a disaster. Because what's happening is I've got faces smushed down into edges. And what's really crazy is if I pull out the geometry, you can see it looks like I'm using the extrude tool, but I'm not. I'm just using the move tool. Right? Extra faces that I don't need, geometry issues, all kinds of tools not functioning right, extra faces on my model that are not adding detail, problems. I'm so glad you asked that, because that's what I was going to talk about next. In terms of preferences, they're where all of Maya's preferences are. If you go to the word Maya across the top of your screen and go to Preferences, you launch Maya's Preferences. And this is where you can make adjustments to those. These are all the categories, and then these are the specific attributes associated with that category. So I'm going to go to Selection, and under Selection, you'll see Polygon Selection, select faces with center or whole face. Maya defaults to whole face, and that's without dots. So if you want the dots, you just click Center, and then hit Save. And then now, you'll have those little dots on there. Right? Now, in terms of fixing this problem, there are two ways to fix it. One, delete the faces you don't need, or two, merge the vertices at the corners. Now, in terms of deleting the faces you don't need, that's pretty straightforward. You just go to the geometry, select the face, and hit Delete. And it goes away. Select the face and hit Delete. Now, wait a minute, there's still one there. Well, that's because you've got more than one face on top of each other there. Select it again and hit Delete. Okay, so there were two on that one. Select this one, delete. Uh-oh. Select it, delete. Ah, now it's gone. Select it, delete. There's only one on that one. Now, if I select and delete all the faces, that face just comes right off. It's not attached anymore. Does that make sense? I deleted the faces that were all around it. Now that's a separate piece. Okay, so maybe that wasn't the solution because my model is going to come completely apart. Does that make sense? Literally, each face will be a separate entity. So in this case, deleting the faces isn't the answer, but merging the vertices at the corner is. Because if I can glue all those vertices together, that will effectively eliminate the faces in between. So let's see how that works. All right, so I'm going to let all those bad, ugly, naughty faces show back up on there. All right. So what we're going to have to do is use a new tool, and it's a very handy one. It's called the merge tool. The merge tool basically allows us to take two vertices and glue them together so they become one. Does that make sense? It literally melds them into one vertice. The most important component of the merge tool is the threshold setting. Threshold determines which vertices glue together. Right? Now, let's say, for example, Brian is a vertice, I'm a vertice, and you're a vertice. We're all different distances from each other. Brian is 1 grid unit from me, and you are 3 grid units from me. Does that make sense? If I select Brian, myself, and you, and I do a merger, and my threshold distance is set for 3, we all become one vertice because we are within that range threshold. If I do the same thing, select the 3 of us, and my threshold is set for 1, only Brian and I will merge. You and I will not merge because he is outside the threshold of 1. His distance is 3. Does that make sense? It's like an area around the vertices. So if I want vertices to merge, I want the vertices that are really close to each other to merge. I don't want this vertice to merge with that one. Does that make sense? Because that's going to crinkle up my model. I'm going to show you what happens when you set your threshold too high, because it is pure comedy. This is the way you use the merge tool. First, select the vertices you would like to merge. I'll just grab a handful of them up here. Edit mesh, merge, and of course I want to go to the options box because that's where we set threshold. So here's my merge options. Let's say my threshold is like, well, I don't know, 5. I run the merge. Every vertice within 5 grid units of each other that I selected is now one vertice. Is that good or bad on the scale? That's very bad on the scale. Right, exactly. I just created a disaster, right? So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to grab all those vertices and I'm going to make my threshold a very small number, 0.001. And what that's doing is saying that vertices a distance of 1/100th of a grid unit, those will merge. Those outside of that will not. And what that guarantees is that only the 4 vertices right there will merge. Only these 4 will merge. Only these 4 will merge because I've got such a small threshold. Make sense? So this time, with a nice small threshold, I run the tool. Boop. And now my geometry is fixed because not all that stuff merged together. And look at how it cleaned up all these faces. These guys still have issues because I need to merge them as well. So I'm going to grab those guys, run the merge with the same threshold distance, and all my problems are gone. Those interior faces are no longer there. This is the way the geometry should be behaving. Does that make sense? It's all about threshold with the merge tool. Got to have the right threshold. Hell yeah? Okay, good. So now we've solved that problem. boop. Let's look at, oh, interior faces. Here's a good one. Now, interior faces is sometimes hard to see. So what I like to do is I'll go to shading and choose X-ray to help me see that. You can see where geometry overlaps each other, you kind of get additional shading. It's a little bit darker. So if you look at this piece of geometry, can you see how there's sort of a bunch of faces in the middle of this thing that aren't doing anything? This is like a button or something, and it's got a detail in the top, this kind of opening. I need that. But this face in here is not doing anything. It's just in my model. It's eating up my calculation time. And Maya's going to have a hard time lighting it anyway because it's on the inside of my geometry, so it's not really receiving light. Does that make sense? This is not good. The good news is it's a super easy fix. What I'm going to do is just delete those faces I don't need. So I go to face mode, and I select these faces on the inside that are doing nothing but lounging on my geometry. All right, do you see all those faces I selected on the inside? They're not doing anything. I'll delete them. Here's what my model looks like when I cleaned it out and made it nice and hollow inside. Right? Here's with the faces. See that shaded area? I don't need any of that stuff. So that's why I just deleted out of there. And again, you kind of have to go into X-ray to see that, because if you're in wireframe, you may or may not recognize that. Just as a beginner, I think when you get more experience, you start to realize what these things are. But it's a little bit easier when you go into that X-ray mode, and you can see, yeah, there's another level inside this thing that I don't need. All right? And that brings us to problem hunt 1. Let me get back to my slides. Problem hunt 1. This is your skill check. This is what you're going to do. We've talked about the various illnesses for polygon geometry. We've talked about how to use the tool to find these things. And we've talked about how to fix the various things we want you to look for. Now, you guys are going to use all of that to do the skill check. One piece of this gun has more than one issue on it. Several issues. So you're going to have to look for them one at a time using the cleanup tool. And you're going to fix the problems. Let's take a look at it. Again, this is a skill check. It's called the cleanup project. And this is what you will complete for the skill check for lecture 4. So let's take a quick look at, again, it's this same file that I've been showing you guys. You'll see this problem hunt 1 and problem hunt 2. So when you turn on problem hunt 1, you will see this piece of geometry. Let me take it out of X-ray. You will see this piece of geometry. This is part of the barrel, right? It has problems, and not just emotional ones. We need to fix this thing. Right off the bat, you can see we got some N-gons in there, right? Now the good news is you can actually see other examples of where it's done right on other parts of the model. Does that make sense? It's a bit of a guide to help you figure out how to fix it. So you're going to have to fix the N-gons, you're going to have to fix the non-planar faces, you're going to have to fix interior geometry, because there's quite a few problems with these different pieces of this part of the gun. So you're going to use the cleanup tool to find the problems, and then you're going to use the various cures that I've shown you to fix the problems so that it's happy geometry. Clean geometry is happy geometry. You won't have any problems with it. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's your skill check for lecture 4. We're going to fix all the problems we can find with this piece of geometry. And again, it's just problem hunt 1. You don't have to do 2. Just 1. There's enough issues in there to keep you busy for a little bit. But I want to make sure that you guys can locate problem geometry and fix it. Do you think I'm going to ask you guys to do that on your own models? You know I am. I'm going to have to. That's my job. So what's going to happen is when you look at the self-grade document, if you see clean geometry is one of the things we're looking for, that should be telling you cleanup tool. Did I run the cleanup tool on my own geometry? Did I find the problems and fix them? Or did I just make something that looks pretty and it's a mathematical disaster? Does that make sense? So make sure you're running that tool on your own models, because again, that's one of the things we're going to be looking for. How did you do in terms of non-manifold and n-gons and interior faces, all that naughtiness? Make sense? Hell yeah? Okay, good. Just want to make sure we're all clean on that. Any questions about what we talked about today? We talked about a fair amount of stuff. Edge looping, bevel tool, edge quality, cleanup tool, clean geometry. I knew if I got through them. Yes. Yeah. Many. Yep. You got to find them. But I listed for you all the things that I'm expecting you guys to look for. We went through that. So it's not going to be beyond that. So there's not like, you know, laryngitis. That's not in there. But the things that I told you about, all are possibilities. So what you have to do is, with the list, run through it and see. Test, look for, troubleshoot, and fix whatever's wrong with it. And be glad that this is the model that I gave you guys. You should have seen the model we used to have the students fix. Oh, man. It was a gun. But it was a gun that one of my students made. And it was a pretty rough example of a model. And I made it worse. So in terms of catastrophically bad geometry, this thing was pretty much the crown prince of that. Yeah, oh, it was really bad. Really bad. And it looked awful, too, which made it even worse. Yeah, no, that thing was terrible. But what I liked about that model was quite a few students asked me, wouldn't it be easier to just rebuild it with all of these problems? And the answer to that was yes, it would be easier. It's not a good exercise because you're already doing modeling. But yeah, in some instances, geometry is so bad that your better bet is just build it again. And that's a thing. And you might be wondering, well, where would this come into play? When would I be rebuilding something? When would I be doing cleanup? Because to be honest with you, we're teaching you guys good habits on how to model, good strategies from the ground up, how to build something. So you shouldn't have, Gesundheit, as many of these kinds of problems. They're going to be fewer and further between. But not everybody was brought up modeling the way they should. And in some instances, you will be asked to fix somebody else's work. Like literally that happens, where a company will be trying to hire somebody to model something for them, and they're making decisions with their wallet, and you're like, this guy will do it for $50. So let's go with that one. You know, and they get a model that's catastrophically bad, and then they have to hire somebody else to fix it. And sometimes that's your job. You're given bad geometry, and it's your job to make it better. Fix it. Make it so that it works. And I've definitely been in that scenario where I'm trying to fix up somebody else's mistakes. And because they don't want to make it model it again. They're all like, well, we paid for this. Make it work, please. We made a bad call. Save us. That happens. But that's part of the work. Oh, that's an excellent question. When do you run the cleanup tool? Do I wait till the end? Do I run it in between? You can run it periodically to look for things like n-gons as you're going, because again, you might want to use the insert edge loop tool and you can't figure out why it's not working. The settings are all the same. I don't understand why it's not working. Let me just run the cleanup tool on it and see if there's something wrong with the face. And in that instance, while you're working, Maya can help point out problem faces and help recognize the fact that, well, that's why the tool doesn't work. I got it. Again, in time, when you become more experienced, if you try to use the inserted edge loop tool and it doesn't work, it's an n-gon in there. I know that's what it is. Does that make sense? But as a beginner, yeah, you can run that tool anytime you want. What I would say is, don't run the tool constantly. The other side of this is sometimes people realize, okay, so I need to be as close to co-audit as I can. I have fewer issues, tools work, all that good stuff. So now I can't model and not have everything in 4 sides. I made a triangle. I made an n-gon. And you just freak and stop working or whatever, and that's not the case. You can work with a mesh that has n-gons on it. You can work with a mesh that's got triangles on it, but you have to be aware of them. Does that make sense? I know that this is an n-gon. So when I'm trying to work on it, if something's not working, I know that's what the problem is. Eventually, you will have to fix it. Does that make sense? So fix it, or at the very least, just be aware of it so that it's not causing problems for you. Does that make sense? So that's a great question. Should I run cleanup tool all day long? No, don't get distracted by it. That's a fun little thing that we do. It's important, but we don't do that all the time because it's more of a distraction. I don't know if you've noticed that when you're modeling, you don't want to stop. You're like, model, 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 look what I'm making. This is amazing, I can't. You don't even want to save. You're just like, I'm going to keep going. Because you get a groove going and you're in the vortex, time, space. It doesn't make any difference. But do stop and save. Do delete the history, freeze the transformations. As I said, I personally recommend every 15 minutes to delete history, freeze transformations, and save the file. And it's true there are automated functions where it's supposed to do that automatically. Supposed to do that. I don't trust Maya as far as I could throw this whole school. So I don't trust it to do that. I go in there and physically save it because I know it's happening. Does that make sense? So there's no prize for having a file with the fewest number of copies. Make many copies. Save as often as you can. Every 15 minutes, a good idea. Because if you're working and you're saving every 15 minutes, if Maya crashes or your laptop crashes or the power goes out or meteor falls through your ceiling and crushes your desk and you survive, no big deal. You've only lost 15 minutes. But if you work for like 8 hours and you're not saving and a meteor crashes through your house and hits your desk, you lost 8 hours worth of work. You know what I mean? And I'm not buying that meteor story. I expect that stuff done on time. So you got to save your files, save often. No, absolutely. And honestly, it's a good workflow to be in because what you'll find is sometimes you'll be modeling something and you'll be going about it a certain way and then realize, you know what, that's not working. It's not doing what I need it to do. It doesn't look right. So rather than start at ground zero and go a different direction, you can backtrack a couple of file versions, start here, and go a different direction with it. And that saves you a tremendous amount of time. So, always a great idea to save many copies. And if a file gets corrupted, it might corrupt a few versions back. Well, eventually there's going to be one that works. So if you've saved every 15 minutes, you have, fipled the odds, quadrupled, sextupled, octupled the odds of you finding a file that will work. So I definitely recommend saving a lot. But that's a good question, a really good question. All right. Anything else? I hear you guys happily clicking away. That's good. Nothing else? Yes. I'm sorry, when you're clicking on the face, it's doing what? You mean the little blue dot in the middle? Okay, yeah, those aren't vertexes. That blue dot is just an indicator of the face, and that's how you select it by clicking that blue dot. You have to go to your preferences and turn that on. go to the word Maya in the upper left-hand corner right next to the black apple. Maya, preferences, and then in your preferences you look at the attributes on the left-hand side and choose selection. And inside of selections attributes, you're going to go to the part where it says select polygons with, and it'll say center or whole face. And you want it set for center, and then hit save, and then you're good. Actually, I don't have one of those roster sheets today, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the lab attendance and put that onto the lecture. So, yeah, no, you're good for today. Not to worry. Anything else? No? Wow. All right, then. You've got a couple of minutes before the other class gets here, but I'm all done talking about what I want to talk about today. I think we got enough. You can work a little bit if you want. You can go grab yourself something to eat. Go home and do whatever you like. Work on Maya and get your projects done. Yeah. Well, you don't. Honestly, the one thing you don't have is time. So you guys really need to make best use of every little second you can scratch out of wherever, because you have a lot to do and a thimble full of time to do it. There's lab today, absolutely. Oh yeah. What do you do between now and lab though is the question. Work on Maya. What's that? Oh, okay, no worries. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I will see you on Monday, and we'll talk about some more fun stuff. And keep modeling. Work like the wind. Sure. Okay.
If I do end up feeling better, you know, I'm probably sure that couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I rolls around, I stay home.
Yeah, if you're not feeling well, that's fine. Honestly, if I could choose between do you go to lab or lecture, I'd rather you went to lecture, because that's really the best use of your time if you've only got that much time. But, you know, if you're not feeling well, you know, and you've given me the documentation, so.
Well, the documentation said for 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I wanted to ask.
Nope, that's fine.